Welcome back, everybody. Hope everyone's having a great week so far. Wanted to take a little time today to make a video I didn't really think that I'd be making, but um, went and saw the latest Marvel film, The Thunderbolts. Now, I say I didn't anticipate making this, and that, to be honest, after Endgame, really outside of Spider-Man movies, the Deadpool and Wolverine film, and Guardians of the Galaxy 3, I think the majority of Marvel's output has been pretty awful as far as the big screen. The Disney Plus stuff has been a little bit worse, with I think Hawkeye and Daredevil probably being the only projects that I think are even somewhat passably good. And so had an opportunity, went and saw the movie Thunderbolts. Wasn't really even anticipating seeing it, but had some free time on a weekend and actually went to check it out. And I will say, I do think it's one of the better Marvel films of the last maybe 7 or 8 years that has come out. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about why I thought the movie was good and just try to make a case for maybe for some folks who have been burned out on Marvel as to why this is actually a pretty decent film. I want to make sure, kind of preface everything by saying, look, this by no means is a masterpiece. This is by no means a top 10 movie of all time. This is not some movie that's going to, change the trajectory of the MCU. Is the MCU back? Stuff like that. I don't think the MCU is ever going to be back to what it was. I think we just live in a way more divided time, and Marvel just burned so many bridges over the last 5 years that I don't think you're ever going to get, the momentum that they had with Endgame and Infinity War and all of that back ever again. But if you critique people when they make bad stuff, I think you should jump on and credit them when they do some things well. And Thunderbolts, to be honest, is a way better movie than it has any right to be. And so I'll kind of go into spoilers as to why I think the movie works. I won't spoil everything, but there are some things that I'll kind of bring up. Most of this is online already. The movie's been out for a couple days, but if you haven't seen it at all or you want to see it later, I'll kind of touch on some things that are spoilerish in the film. So to start from the top on this, one of the reasons I didn't want to see this movie is the concept of the Thunderbolts was one that I really enjoyed in the comics, and I loved the way they executed in the comics that Baron Zemo and this team of villains was filling the void for the Avengers, but really it was just kind of a big scam. And then over time, some of those characters genuinely became more altruistic. In all honesty, that would have been a perfect movie for Marvel to make, especially given how much the Avengers being absent has become sort of a running thing within the MCU in the last couple of years. And so it is interesting, even in something they execute well, that as a comic book fan, I still look at what the comic books did and wonder why they didn't go with that. But so I think for a comic purist who loves the Thunderbolts, absolutely, I can get where this movie would be frustrating because it is that title in name only. Largely, this is just them borrowing the name Thunderbolts from the comics and sort of using that to create a new team within the film universe. And so I do see if you're a comic book purist who loves the Thunderbolts, that's probably going to bug you quite a bit. I think if you look past that, the reason this movie works in a way that other Marvel movies haven't in a long time is that one, I think there is actually some respect given to older characters in the MCU. And there's an attempt to make these new characters fill the void that is missing with those characters, but not at the expense of the older characters. And so what I kind of mean by that is I look at the way they handled Sam Wilson becoming Captain America in the MCU. A lot of it felt like their goal was we need to drag Steve down or make Steve retroactively ignorant or, make it that Sam is more heroic or more inspirational than Steve Rogers. And that was always just a weird way to take things because it just never was going to connect in quite the same way. Right. I think the same thing you can say kind of happened with Shuri and Wakanda Forever. Not that they took shots at T'Challa or anything, but there was this attempt by Marvel, I think, with a lot of these replacement characters, new characters that we've gotten, where it seems like Marvel is trying to tell you, this character is amazing. You should love this character. And they're trying to, make it seem like these characters are as grand as Thor and Captain America and Iron Man and Spider-Man and Star-Lord and all the characters that folks liked in the first 10 years of the MCU. What I appreciate about Thunderbolts is this movie is largely a bunch of D and C tier list characters within the MCU, with the exception of Bucky. And I'll get to where I think Bucky really worked in this movie in a second. But what I like that is the movie never loses sight of them. The entire point is that these characters are not great characters. These characters are not the people you would expect to be heroes. They're not the ones who should be leading a team within the MCU. And the movie has enough awareness to never try to convince you that Yelena Belova in this movie is better than Black Widow. They never try to convince you that John Walker is on par with Steve Rogers or that Ghost is as cool as the other Avengers characters. The entire premise of the film is showing how these folks are broken people who are just trying to slightly do better and are put in a situation where, despite their shady actions of the past, they have to actually do something altruistic. And I think watching that, it reminds me a little bit of the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. And while it's not nearly as good as that film, what I do think was cool is that concept of kind of a found family of broken people who are overcoming their differences and really looking to just try to move past the tragedies in their past. I think it's a universal theme in films, and I do appreciate the work that was done in here. It felt like for the first time in a while, Marvel was trying to make you like the characters in the movie instead of trying to convince you that these characters are amazing and awesome and better than everything we've seen before. And I think that was some of the main failures of so many of the Marvel movies since Endgame, where, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania really felt like it was a push that, oh, you think Kane's amazing. You're going to want, and it didn't really work. Or you're going to think Cassie Lang's amazing, right? The way they've pushed She-Hulk and some of these different characters, it's like they forgot to actually make the character likable. They just thought, oh no, we're going to tell you this character is amazing and you should just go with it. Whereas this movie genuinely seems like with Yelena and with Ghost and with Winter Soldier and with Guardian and John Walker, that they genuinely are trying to make you care about the character. Not necessarily like all of them, not making them all perfect heroes, but just make it that it's a person that you can understand where they're coming from, what's happened to them, and why they are who they are. And then by the end, you're sort of naturally rooting for them to overcome their differences and really, find their potential. I think the second reason I liked the movie was its treatment of Bucky. And one of the complaints that I've had a lot with the MCU is they haven't treated necessarily the majority of the original Avengers characters who are left with a ton of respect. One of the reasons I do actually genuinely like the Hawkeye TV series is that it does treat Hawkeye with a ton of respect. And while Kate Bishop has banter with him in that show, at no point do they ever try to pitch it as she's better than him or her lecturing him. She actually kind of reveres him as a character, and he kind of has to talk her down from the perch of like thinking he's amazing. And that really works on a human level. Where I think some of the other ones, She-Hulk, they took so many shots at Hulk in that. I think even, stuff like Falcon and the Winter Soldier tried to position Falcon as greater than he was because of factors that had never been a part of the MCU. And so what I did like in this movie is when Bucky shows up, the best action scene in the film is Bucky, and he gets like the real clear superhero moment. And these other sort of C and D listers really view him as like, whoa, that's Bucky. And I thought that was really cool. It kind of reminded me of when you see like a smaller character's comic book and one of the big guys like, Hulk or Spider-Man shows up and they get one of those cool moments that just shows the difference. So I liked the way they handled that. I think the other thing is Bucky was perfectly used in the movie, and that one of the main themes that Bucky tries to get through with this team is when he kind of uncovers the plot of what's going to happen and the reason for this set of people to be the one to address the issue. Bucky's main speech to them is essentially, look, bad things have happened to all of you. You've all done bad things. You can choose to be defined by that, or you can choose to try to do something about that. And I think that is a really cool thing that it's happened because Marvel has really, I think, had some interesting things on heroism in their movies in the last couple of years, where it's been more, even in the comic book front, where like people who have been victimized all of a sudden have the right to do whatever they want or to treat people ugly as a result of that. In this movie, while it doesn't go past what's happened to these characters and the traumas that they've, had inflicted on them, it also doesn't ignore that these people have done bad things too. And so I liked the fact that the main, pushing of this was Winter Soldier, who's perfectly positioned for that because of what he's done in his past, and the actions that he took, even though they weren't his own. And him basically just telling him, hey, man, it's time to get over that and kind of, go and try to do the right thing. And I think that was really, really cool. The other part that I think really worked in this film is they kept the stakes, at least for this movie, more set to just the people who were involved in the film. Marvel to me has had a huge issue with over grasping things for plots where, oh, the whole universe, the whole multiverse, the whole this is at stake, the whole that is at stake. And I think what this movie does, while the threat does kind of blow up at the end of the film, it's still very personal to the people who are in this movie. And it just kind of keeps it contained to where you understand why these are the folks who are involved. There are larger questions as far as, because of the end taking place in New York, where, the MCU drawbacks of if it's a shared universe, where is Spider-Man, where is Daredevil, etc. But I do think the movie keeps the focus tight enough on the five or six characters who really matter that you understand why it's them who's there at the end of the film. I think there also was a great thing in this movie as far as they didn't give the characters powers all of a sudden to do things that they couldn't do earlier in the film. So, for instance, one of the movies I've really detested the most was like Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, where all of a sudden characters in those movies just gain powers all of a sudden that they didn't have earlier in the film that grant them to the ability to do something in a scene. I think Ant-Man and the Wasp did that, or Quantumania. I think Thor: Love and Thunder did that as well. What I liked in this movie is all of these characters, and the movie is self-aware enough to kind of point out that these people are just people who can shoot and punch, right? And so in the movie, when they face the threat, which is the Sentry in this movie, they are outclassed, they are outgunned. They don't all of a sudden get some sort of special skills and powers where, all of a sudden they can do things they weren't able to do before. They truly are outgunned, outmatched, and have no chance to win. And I think, again, one of the great parts of this movie was, when there is that fight scene between the Sentry and this group, they just get wrecked in that scene. They don't nerf the Sentry to make it to where he can't, beat them or give somebody some overly heroic moment. The Sentry just wipes the floor with them, which was refreshing to see that the movie didn't do some sort of, oh, by the power of friendship, they can all fight better kind of thing. They get their butt kicked. And I think another brilliant part of that scene was, the part that makes the team give up and kind of run is when Bucky is the one who gets disabled. Again, I thought that was really cool to be sort of reverential to this old Avengers character to where they're all willing to fight. And then once they see Bucky gets completely knocked out, like they get the heck out of there. And I thought that was really cool in the way they did that. I think the handling of the Sentry is another portion of this movie that was pretty good as well, in that it's the first time in a while that I've seen Marvel approach a character from the comic books and do a decently faithful adaptation of who the character was. And they've done so much, and even in this film, you've obviously got Ghost and Taskmaster, who basically have nothing in common with their comic book counterpart. The way they handled the Sentry in this, down to the costume, the presence of the Void, was actually pretty cool and really well handled. The ending of the film, I think, is actually unexpected, and I don't think it's going to hit well with everybody. And I know, in the current age that we have with, criticism of the MCU and stuff like that, there's going to be people who largely boil this down to one of two things. They're either going to talk about how it's this amazing statement on mental health, and I think over exaggerate somewhat the actual impact of it, or they're going to, take shots at it and basically, oh, through the power of hugging, things get, better. At the end of the film, the way they deal with the Sentry is largely just by connecting with him empathetically and making him stop. And I thought that was actually kind of cool. It sort of, again, reminded me a little bit of the end scene of Guardians of the Galaxy, where, all of them kind of unite together to contain the power of the Infinity Stone. And again, it's not as well done as that. But I do like that these heroes who were broken had to kind of be willing to sacrifice themselves and sort of try to help at the end, this broken character that is the Sentry. And I thought it was a creative ending. It was different. I was glad it didn't devolve into another CGI versus CGI cutscene looking thing from a PS3 game like we've seen in so many Marvel films. I do think that I appreciate that they actually tried to do something different. And I do think that was really well done. Where I would also say this movie gets a little bit of credit for me is Marvel lately, the CGI has just been awful. And while I am sure you can pull scenes from this and specific ones that don't look the best, I do think this was the most real looking Marvel movie in a while. Most of it's probably still CGI. But we've gotten to a point with Marvel where you can see some of the behind the scenes stuff, and it's like they've got Nick Fury in a room, and like he's holding a gun in the movie, and like in the CGI, he's holding like a block with green dots on it. There's no chair. It's all CGI. Like everything looks fake. And I do think, I don't know for sure if it was, but at least the way they filmed this movie, it looked like they were either on location or they did just a better job of keeping things kind of scaled down to where it's not as obvious in terms of the CGI front in this film. Overall, I do think this was a much, much better movie than it had any right to be. And I do think if you have been kind of burned by Marvel and you're just like, man, another MCU film, this one might be worth checking out. I do think there's some actual quality to this, and I think this one will hold up well. I don't blame anybody for being jaded by the MCU. I have certainly been there myself. They burned me out about 2 or 3 years ago just with misfire after misfire after misfire. But it was really cool to see Marvel actually kind of get back to a movie where they seemed to want you to care about the characters and prioritized the actual character arcs of these folks instead of just crafting together a bunch of CGI scenes and then thinking, we'll just tell you this character is amazing and you should just go with it because we told you. They actually seem to try to build some stakes, some characters, some growth, some development. They let the characters be wrong. I will say the worst part of this movie is probably the opening, and that's kind of tough to say on a movie. And so I do think if you go see the film or watch the movie, the first 10 minutes is by far the most rough portion of the film. But after you get past that part, I think it just really clicks together well. It by no means is perfect. It by no means is going to be a top five MCU film of all time. But I do think the Thunderbolts is actually pretty good. And that is not something I thought I'd be saying about this Marvel movie or really any MCU film outside of Spider-Man anytime soon. So I definitely would say try to give it a watch if you want to. If you're burnt out by the MCU, I definitely get that. But I do think this one might be worth your time. As always, folks, let me know what you think down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. God bless you. We'll catch you in our next video.